Welcome to the Tension Podcast. I'm your host, Donna DuPont with the Archipelago of Design. Joining me today is Vince DiDato. He's a designer, architect, and military engineer with a master's in civil military interaction. Vince's work in design has been recognized worldwide. He specializes in conflict evolution and civil protection. So welcome, Vince, to the podcast.
Thank you, Donna. I'm very happy to be here with you tonight.
So Vince, you've had a very interesting and unusual career. You have a lot of military experience, but you've also blended some of your work that includes technology, creativity, imagination. Like you've seemed to have really bridged a variety of different types of skill sets and different types of ways of thinking and innovating. So I just want you to just take a moment to tell us a little bit about your journey in design and the type of work that you do.
Okay, yes, it's interesting indeed. I come from a military tradition family, and when I was young, I was really against that, I have to say. And I wanted to be an artist. So I went to my father and I said, yes, I want to go to an academy, but an art academy. So he was very kind and patient with me. And I said, well, it's better you study something more solid for your career. So you study architecture and design. And so I went to Milan and I began to study at the Milan Politecnico. It's a university there, and together in a design school. And so I became a designer and very passionate. And I began straight after to participate to international events and expositions. I began with an exposition at the Centre Pompidou in Paris and Triennale in Milano. And after that, in a couple of years, I won the Compasso d'Oro when I was 27. So it was a really, how you can say, a sort of boost of success in design for a young man like I was. And I began to question my career at that point, and I wanted to be more deep in my work. And I shifted to sustainability and systemic design for industries and research in how the industry, it was the 80s, how the industry could be more sustainable in that time. It was right at the beginning of the discourse on climate change. It was called a greenhouse effect at the time. And so I began to do this kind of things. Then at the end of the 90s, the military part came in from the window, as we say, and I enlisted in the Italian Army Reserve as an officer. Before I was drafted as a normal private in the mountain troops, and then I enlisted as an officer in the Engineers Corps. The Engineers Corps is peculiar because is 300 specialists that take care of the innovation and the technical aspects in the army. And in 2003, I was at the officer school first, and then at the first CIMIC functional specialist course at the multinational CIMIC group in Motta di Livenza in Italy, NATO unit. And a few months after, I was in Iraq, in Syria, for 2 shifts, and after, in 5 years later, in Afghanistan for 3 more shifts, with the CIMIC centers and the J9, that is civil affairs, public affairs staff function inside NATO. And I had the opportunity to apply my knowledge as a designer and an architect and a planner to reconstruction in critical events and crisis areas. And it has been a huge experience for me. But also it has been a huge experience because I saw how much important is that function inside the military today. How actually the tip of the spear of the mission in those cases was actually the CIMIC, the civil military cooperation, because we had to let's say conquer the heart of minds as was dictated by the doctrine at the time, but mostly it was a way to bridge human beings from this side with human beings to the other side. And that is, I think, the key to solve conflicts. And I've been then more and more convinced of that. And so I began to write down theories regarding how we can solve conflicts in an innovative and creative way, using less and less violence and force in doing that. Of course, force is necessary in a conflict like that. Of course, I'm not saying that I'm a full-scale pacifist, just passive on that. I don't say that. Unfortunately, human nature imply conflicts. Life actually implies conflicts. But we can confront the situations in a different way than just throwing in tanks and rifles. Yeah. And I think it's more intelligent to find better solution to solve them. That is the point that interested me the most. Yes.
That's fantastic. That's so interesting. And I love how you were talking about just the ability to anticipate potential conflicts, right? And think about different ways to potentially de-escalate situations, find different ways to pass forward that perhaps can potentially mitigate any further escalation of violence. So important.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So I think also the prevention is important. So it's a never-ending work that we have to conduct all the time, all along, even in peacetime. So
it's an ongoing type of situation where you're
yes.
managing continuously. That's exactly. Interesting to know. So for our audience that may not be familiar with civil-military interaction, can you tell us a little bit about how you would describe that and why it's important?
Well, civil-military interaction is, in my view, the most interesting aspect of civil-military cooperation. Is that NATO defines it as all the activities between the military bodies of NATO with non-military actors for mutual understanding, and this is, I think, an important definition, to enhance effectiveness and efficiency in crisis management and conflict prevention and resolution. I think is a fantastic definition. And also, part of my career, I arrived to the Helmut Schmidt University of the Bundeswehr in Hamburg, and I got my master's in CMI, Civil Military Interaction, there recently. And one thing that we share as a thinking at the Helmut Schmidt is that actually all the military officers, no matter which specialty, no matter which branch, should know CMI, civil military interaction. They should know it, because I think that the key for the conflict resolution is in there, as you can imagine from the definition, that is so It's so important. And I know that there has been a crisis of civil-military interaction and civil-military cooperation, starting from the Syrian conflict in 2016 until 2000, recently, very recently, 2022. And the people was convinced, well, with this kind of conflicts, the new kind of conflicts, so much kinetic, as the military says, there is no necessity to interact with a civilian, because the tanks and airplanes are more important than, and infantry is more important than understanding the population. Well, I think that the Ukrainian conflict recently and also the situation in the Middle East are actually demonstrating exactly the opposite. More and more, the conflict is evolving in technology, in aspects. Is not only kinetic. Actually, I am convinced. We will speak about that probably more, but the kinetic part of the conflict is just a fraction of all the aspects that build up a war today. The hybrid aspects are way more important, and most importantly, and unfortunately, we can see that civilians are more and more targeted into the conflict and more involved. So actually, civil-military interaction is fundamental at this point. First of all, to avoid that, to literally save lives and save resources at the same time, and to avoid that, especially with the automatization of the war, the civilians are involved in the conflict as much as possible, of course. That is
Right.
so important.
You want to be able to avoid, civilian impact during, and to de-escalate with conflict. So that makes a lot of sense. And I guess if you can tell us a bit more about, with those examples you were saying where you're seeing some new patterns in terms of conflict, and that the shift is not, the focus isn't so much kinetic but non-kinetic. Are there any gaps right now in civil military interaction that are happening, are taking right now in the world?
Yes, I think so. Yes, always there are gaps, and always we can do better, of course. In particular, I see, and we discussed this, the evolution of CIMIC and the civil-military interaction in the future, in the next 20 years, at the annual convention in Den Haag. And we work on exactly on the future scenarios. And one important aspect that we highlighted is the absolute necessity to build a network, a permanent network between the military and the civilian parts, between the military and the industries, between the military and the governments, and at the same time to establish an education system that allows to prepare, of course, the population for the crisis, and the crisis will be more and more overlapped. We can say there will be wars and critical natural events altogether for climate change, and a lot of different kind of crises, and overlapped with hybrid war, that is not only the kinetic on one specific limited geographic area, but will be involving broader spaces and social aspects. And we will need more specialists, and we will have to prepare the young people technically and also philosophically, if you want, to be ready to interact between military and civilians in a way, first of all, that prevent the explosion of the conflict, the clash, And then, in order to be capable to manage the conflict in the less costly in human lives and resources as possible, to preserve democracy, the economy, and the society as such.
Thank you. That was really helpful. It sounds like this gap you're identifying, this new network is an opportunity moving forward. Does it exist now, or is this something that is something we want to build moving forward in the future?
Well, for some aspects, there are some networks already, but the idea is to build a more structured network, a more at the same time structured and flexible network. What is lacking is a mindset to open this possibility. There is I conducted my research for my master's in CMI, and I noticed how much, and I was specifically working on the energy sector, and I was seeing that, for example, industries are the less open to that kind of interaction, actually, while the associations of the operators that actually include the industries are pretty interested in the possibility to open that dialogue with the military. The government, of course, need that, and I think that we need also the educational part, because at this moment, I personally think nor the military nor the civilian are ready, have the knowledge in this moment to exchange in the best way and in an organized way the knowledge that they have one side and the other. That
Right.
is important, I think.
Yes, definitely having being able and ready to be able to engage in these types of conversations that are very much, we're seeing a trend, an escalation of different conflicts that are tied to a lot of different changes today in our really complex world. And as you mentioned earlier, climate change and security,
Yeah.
that's a big driver in our global environment, and it has like broad impacts across all sectors and even human security and definitely resources. So it can be very much an amplifier and really escalate conflicts potentially in certain regions of the world.
Yes.
So I'm curious. So you had mentioned around your approach, a very systemic approach to understanding the evolution of conflicts, because this sounds like this type of understanding of systems and patterns is really important if you want to anticipate conflict and then be very proactive in engaging in dialogue to prevent, mitigate, and to be very creative in terms of solutions. So what does this look like for you? Like, what's your first step when you want to understand a system and you want to understand the potentiality of that system, moving into a conflict situation? What is it that you look for? How do you start?
Well, I think is a peculiar way of thinking of the designer. I think is this foreseeing the situation is typical of the designers, I think, and it comes from my previous experience as a designer, actually, and what I noticed in my military experience as a designer is that there is a tendency to, there is an impeccable planning always, especially NATO. NATO is a model for planning, actually, and but planning is not enough, and planning has a bias, a basic bias, in my opinion, especially in the Western military, but also we have seen that with Russia.
Okay.
Um,
And what's that bias, would you say,
and
in general?
the bias is a Clausewitzian philosophy and formation of
And what does
the.
that mean for our audience who might not be familiar with that
Yes.
theory?
Well, Clausewitz was this military thinker of the beginning of the 19th century, and
Mm-hmm.
is considered the highest level of strategic thinking today. Um, but and he wrote a book that is called On War, uh, uh, partially finished by his wife. We have to acknowledge that it was not only him. Uh, and his theory is that um, you have to apply violence on your enemy until you have destroyed his capacity to react or to act against you. That is the basic of Clausewitz. In a short, well, of course, it's not only that. The Clausewitzian thinker today would have a lot to say to my definition, but actually, what struck me the most is that vision of the conflict.
Yeah.
I think that well, everybody of the Clausewitzian part says that Clausewitz is very modern, but I actually think that he finished his function with the First World War. Actually, it was the representation of a world that was a feudalistic world, a world that was based on the evolution of agriculture. And let me mention a neurophysiologist, very, very famous, that is Robert Sapolsky, that is saying that war began with the agricultural society, not with hunter-gatherers. We had no war with hunter-gatherers. And it has been, Clausewitz has been transposed into the industrial society after World War One, in a way that is not functional. And we have seen that, for example, I make an example, all the invasions after World War II included never worked. And invading a country is a pretty is a vision that is pretty peculiar of the agricultural feudal society. But it cannot work. We have seen that, and I was saying before that we have to we have to deal with societies and human beings that do not accept to be a resource of the territory, but they think they want to grow, they want to evolve, they want to travel today a lot, and they want to exchange with the other society. So how you can conquer a country? You cannot do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So it's the
also
mind. No.
yes,
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah.
actually, you cannot even conquer a mindset, you cannot even conquer a mind, let me
No.
say.
Mhm.
You have to exchange with a mind and a mindset and a culture. So that is very important. So Clausewitz doesn't work in that sense.
Right.
Absolutely.
So it's not necessarily, I mean, it fit a different period and different time, but as the
Absolutely.
world is changing, it is definitely not aligned with more of a sustainable future. It's definitely not aligned with civil military interaction thinking
Definitely.
and the amount of collaboration that's needed on the climate change and security front. So there's a bit of a tension there between that mental model and mindset and where we need to go in the future.
I think so. I think so. Paradoxically, Sun Tzu, that is older, uh, is more fit for the modern times. And
So tell us a
if
bit more about that. Tell us a bit more about Sensi, you call
yes,
it? Okay, tell us,
Sun
what is
Tzu.
that for those who may not know?
Sun Tzu was a school, probably was also a general, but actually the name represents a school of strategic thinking of 2,500 years ago in China. Uh, I am convinced that it was present also before in the human cultures, especially of the East and the Pacific. And I wrote a book about that. And let's say that it has been written 2,500 years ago, but was probably transmitted orally before. And basis is the most famous phrase that is remembered by everybody is winning without fighting. That is a sort of, let me say, that is a sort of headline for civil military interaction, as we say. And if we look around in these times, is what China is doing. Because actually is a Taoist way of thinking, is a philosophy that was present at the time and still is alive, that considered the interaction between humans in a certain way, in a flow, instead of a center of gravity. The center of gravity is a definition typically Clausewitzian that crystallize the situation in one point and one time, while Sun Tzu speaks about flow of time and space, and you have to adapt to that. And you have to actually adapt and at the same time position everything in a way that drive the events in your favor. And Sun Tzu doesn't speak about enemies, he speaks about opponents or antagonists. And it's also a philosophy that, as every Taoist aspects of philosophy, speaks about the internal conflict, not only the external one. So
The internal conflict, do you mean the internal conflict within organizations or within
within
humans?
within an individual, within an organization, and in every aspect of
Yeah.
human life. And
Right.
that is, I think, is important to know, because we cannot confront any conflict outside if we are not harmonized. And I don't want to sound new aging or this kind of things. Is nothing about of that. I'm speaking about really a consciousness that
Yeah.
we have to have in being in the conflict. That is an aspect of life, and so solving a conflict is functional to a new configuration that we want, and yes, that we want, and that is just a step toward another change and another configuration that will happen after. We cannot
That's really
crystallize and dichotomize our antagonists from ourselves, because we are part of a system, a flowing system that is that. And to close the circle and go into the systemic thinking and design, that is actually an example of that. You conceive a system that is made by a lot of factors that are you, all the challenges, the events, and the ambience, I call it, not only the environment, but also the environment that is a cultural environment, and that is the perceived environment, not only the objective environment, and all that contributes to a status quo that we want to change or we have to change through a conflict, and we have to have clear where we want to, which kind of output we want from that situation systemically, and how to reach another position and timing to evolve further from that. And I think also there is another designer that we can recall that he was not a Taoist, of course, but he was an American designer, that was Richard Buckminster Fuller,
Oh,
that
yes. I
explained
love
that
his work.
very clearly.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. It was
Yes.
one of
His
my
work is fantastic. I
exactly.
love his quote that says, in order to change a model or a system, you have to build a new model, right? And but it has to have a new mindset, right? You don't try to necessarily, it's hard to fix the reality. You want to create a new model of where you want to go with a new goal, a new intention, a new mindset towards achieving that, right? So it really speaks to what you just talked about in terms of, the importance of understanding the worldview, the mindset, the culture, and how that's playing out in the system. And that really, if you want to change a paradigm, you really need to dig deep and really re-examine those models, those theories, that outlook in order to shape something very different.
Exactly. As you see, he's not new aging. Is he was really pragmatic,
Very
Richard
pragmatic,
Buckminster
but
Fuller.
also linked to the
I think
wisdom, like wisdom, right?
exactly,
So
exactly. He was at
that's
the same
fantastic. I
time,
love that.
maybe not knowing, it was at the same time Taoist and pragmatic, and it was conceiving the world in that way.
That's
I like
interesting.
that.
That's really, I like that too. I do like that a lot. So it sounds like, going forward, civil military interaction is going to be extremely important. It's going to be playing potentially a bigger role. And so I want to kind of move the conversation towards new opportunities going forward. What are some of the, what you think based on your work? I know you were at the CIMIC conference recently. And so just what were some of the insights from that conference and opportunities going forward for civil military interaction?
Yes, as I said, it is really important, and it's I think it's fundamental to understand that uh, civil military interaction is not only important for the military, is not only important for supporting the civilians in the conflict, or uh, saving the civilians in the conflict. Excuse me. But it's important also for the civilians, because if you have a society that can interact between the civilian part and the military one, a lot of technological and innovation can happen. And that innovation can spill both sides, not only technological, but also cultural and um, yes, and there is a spilling between the two. So the spilling that happens inevitably determines a growth of the entire society in that
Right,
sense. And
right.
let me say, I was examining that possibility, for example, in my research regarding the energy transition now, necessary
Mhm.
energy transition that is an unavoidable necessity today, and how, for example, the military is running behind this transition, at the same time having a fundamental necessity to change their logistical aspects regarding the energy supply. Um, a mutual exchange between the civilians, innovation, and the military is absolutely necessary at this point. But we cannot reach it just, let me say, buying the civilian solution, industrial solutions, and transferring them into the military. I think
Right.
we have to collaborate strictly to find that, and the spilling, and I'm using this as an example of what I was saying before. The spilling that can happen both parts can be incredibly valuable.
So it sounds like
Um,
it's like an opportunity for like co-creative design or prototyping of
exactly,
solutions between
exactly.
private sector and military. But then there's also the civilian aspect in terms of local communities, because there's a lot of emphasis
Yeah,
in the climate change and security space around just transition, because
yeah,
energy is very important because it's tied to food and water, and that's an important nexus and for human security and
yeah.
to mitigate conflict, right? So can you speak to those potential opportunities for communities too? Is that potentially on the horizon?
Yes, you mentioned water and food, and there is um, a, a strict connection between energy, water, and food. You cannot avoid to consider them together. And for example, in an area like the Mediterranean, and especially the southern Mediterranean area, that is an area that is fast growing in demography and in urbanization, and also evolving as economies at the same time. They have a desperate need for more energy, and they will use more and more energy in the next 10 years, um, with implication for Europe that will be important from that aspect. But if we don't consider water and food for those societies as fundamental, and to guarantee them water and food, we cannot have stability and security in all the area. So how we can avoid that? I usually speak about comprehensive sustainability. I like to speak about comprehensive sustainability. Comprehensive sustainability for me is uh, environment, yes; economy, yes; society, of course, but also culture. The fourth pillar of the house of sustainability, and the house of sustainability needs four pillars, is culture, that is made of mutual understanding and education, and mutual education. Africa is fast growing, for example, and is rich in resources. Europe has a lot of technological knowledge and economical power, but is very weak from this on the side of energy. And I was saying that in 2008, we have to find ways to cooperate on the same level to guarantee mutual prosperity and stability. And I think that is the way. And
So there's a lot more work to do moving forward. And it sounds like your civil military interaction has a common agenda with peace and security type of networks. Is there any kind of collaboration that happens between those different agencies?
uh, you mean in the world today? Yes.
Yeah, broadly
What?
as part of the network you were talking about. Are they moving towards more collaboration, or is
Yeah,
there? Yeah.
I think so. I think so. One example is the Union for the Mediterranean, for example, that is a network of nation, not only of the Mediterranean but also of Europe, and like we can speak about a broader Mediterranean. And excuse me, is the season. Uh, um, is a cooperation that they are seeking, and they are working hard on all these comprehensive sustainability aspects in the specific region, and those implies also the security aspects. Um, they don't take care of the security part directly, but they are part of the network of the European Union, of the agency network of the European Union, and the European Union has this security aspect as a primary theme uh, uh, now, and also in the previous period, with strict cooperation with NATO and with other partners, or outside also NATO itself. So yes, there are cooperation happenings. I think a lot of work can be done better, especially in the context of that education and network necessity for civil military interaction that we have to develop for in the next few years to be
Yeah,
ready for the
to be
future.
ready.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so if someone wants to learn more about civil military interaction, maybe they don't have that background, but they're curious. Are there any resources available to kind of help them start to build their knowledge?
Yes, of course. The first contact to consider is the Helmut Schmidt University of the German Armed Forces in Hamburg. They have a website. HSU is the acronym. They cooperate strictly with the CIMIC Center of Excellence in Den Haag, in the Netherlands.
Okay.
The every year they start a master course in civil military interaction that previews courses, seminars, and courses in Hamburg and online also.
Oh, good.
Uh, in my course had also students from Canada, Australia, and of course they couldn't travel, and they can connect online to follow the seminars. And courses at the CIMIC Center of Excellence in Den Haag.
Oh, great.
Specifically, the field staff workers course, and the high command course in civil military cooperation. Incredibly valuable, incredibly interesting. Not the only ones that the Center of Excellence does, is they also make other courses for functional specialists. They work on the field, or civil military analysts for the civil military interaction. And yes, it's incredibly valuable. I think is the only example at the moment um, to
That's
work on
interesting.
CMI. Yeah.
That's very interesting. And is it open to anybody, or do you need to have a specific background in order to qualify to take these courses?
No, it's open. You must have a certain number of university credits to enlist, to enroll. I think it's 180, something like that. At least you have to have 3 years of university before, or better, another university grade, master before. And in my year, there were many backgrounds, students that were participating, military and civilians. So it's really
That's
open.
great. It's very
Yes,
open. That's
it's
wonderful.
really
I
interesting.
really, that's wonderful to hear. So, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've learned so much from you around civil military interaction. I definitely want to learn more moving into the future. So, just to kind of conclude the podcast, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave with our audience in terms of important things they need to keep in mind when thinking about civil military interaction in today's world?
Um, Civil military interaction is complex. Why a lot of there are a lot of backgrounds in the students of that topic, because it involves, let me say, all the aspects of human activities. That makes the challenge complex and at the same time incredibly exciting. Um, I think that this is and will be the base also for a better society that opens the comprehension of the differences, and not only from the humanitarian point of view, but also as a cultural plus that we can add to our lives. That is so needed, I think, in our society today.
I
Mm.
agree. I absolutely agree. Well,
An
thank
opening
you
of the
so
life.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vince, for sharing your experience and your knowledge today on the podcast. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you to you, Donna. Is an opportunity that I value a lot, because I think it's so exciting to share these important themes with as much people as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you.